Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lori Siskin, MAPERS Secretary Treasurer. A copy of today's presentation can be found on the events page of the MAPERS website. A link to the handouts was also included in the reminder notice that you got this morning via email. Today we're going to hear an election recap and how these results may affect Michigan's public employee retirement system. Our speakers are MAPERS lobbyists from Capital Services, Noah Smith and Ben Bodkin. Questions for Noah and Ben can be submitted through the Zoom app utilizing the green Q&A button on your screen. And I will ask questions sometimes during, sometimes at the end of the presentation. So welcome Noah and Ben.
Thanks, Lori, and good afternoon, everybody. So funny thing happened on the way to the office a couple of Tuesdays ago. Contentious election, a lot of things went on, and a lot of things are going to have a bearing on public policy sort of largely, both at the state level and of course at the national level with not only discussions about, people who have been unfamiliar with the electoral process before, we're now suddenly laser focused on the electoral process and don't always have an understanding of how that sort of works and what the electoral process goes through and some of the safeguards that have been put in place. It's great that people are paying attention more than ever before. And sometimes contentious elections will do that. It puts people focused on an area of civics that perhaps you wouldn't know unless you've been directly involved in it or studied it in college like Ben and I did. But outside of that, I mean, like I said, it's good for civic engagement, but it should require some conversation and a little bit of knowledge about what all of that means and the processes that are in place and that we put in place over time to help sort of protect our elections. And we're going to cover a little bit of that today because we want to sort of put people at ease with this is what electoral politics is and this is sort of the function of how it works. But we also want to have a discussion just about what the stakes were in the election, because there was a lot of stuff going on your election ballot besides for just the president of the United States, a lot of things down the ballot that are going to have a bearing, of course, federally, and most impact to MAPERS at the state level. I mean, really not a lot changed at the state level, but some things have changed on the state level. And we're going to have a little bit of that discussion as we go. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Again, I'm Noah Smith, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ben Bodkin. At Capital Services. We have been fortunate enough to have been MAPERS lobbyists for coming up on a couple of decades now. And it's been our true pleasure to represent local units of government and retirement systems before the state legislature. So without further ado, let's go. So what were the stakes in Michigan when we had this election? So besides for president, the state legislature has 38 Senate seats and 110 House seats. Our Senate seats were not up for election this time around, but all 110 of our state representatives were up for election. All 14 seats in our U.S. congressional delegation were up for election. One of our 2 U.S. Senate seats had an election. We had 2 seats on our 7-member Michigan Supreme Court. And then there was a lot of local elections too, some local judicial elections. You had maybe some township trustees. You maybe had some city council seats, some mayoral elections, things along those lines. Lots of little down ballot things that change sort of municipality to municipality. So let's start out with the big one, U.S. Senate and Congress. Right now, the U.S. Senate, the current partisan split on our Senate seats in Michigan. Remember from your civics classes way back in high school, every state gets 2 seats, and both of our seats right now are both Democratic. Congress, we have 14 seats. We had 16 seats a handful of years ago, but Michigan's fluctuating population and the growth of population in other states has sort of shifted that. So we've lost a few over time. Michigan's down to 14, but it's still a larger state and still a meaningful state, not just because of Michigan's odd electoral politics, because you have whole counties and municipalities that could help swing elections one way or another. But it's still at 14 seats, a relatively sizable delegation and an important delegation for anybody to consider. The Democratic incumbent, Gary Peters, who was elected 6 years ago, remember your federal senator gets a 6-year stint at a time, and those are staggered around the country so that not half of the U.S. Senate is up for election at once, or not the entirety of the U.S. Senate is up for election at once. They do it sort of in a staggered fashion, and part of that is for continuity, so that there's always sort of a majority of members who at least have served a term before a bulk of them are up for election again. One of the few safeguards we have baked into the U.S. Constitution and what that looks like. So again, 2 Democratic senators here in Michigan, and the incumbent, who has been now 1-term incumbent, Gary Peters, narrowly late in the night edged out his challenger, John James, to retain his 6-year post. Let's see, 2 open seats in our U.S. congressional, our 14-member congressional delegation had 2 seats that were open. 12 of the 14 were incumbents who ran for re-election. No change in partisan control of our open seats in our congressional delegation. All the seats stayed exactly where they were. If it was a Republican seat, be it a closed seat, an incumbent seat, or an open seat, it stayed Republican. Democratic seats stayed Democratic. All of those districts have sort of been drawn in such a way that they were all relatively safe this time around and stayed that way. It doesn't mean that there weren't some real close battles. In fact, there were, and we'll cover a couple of those in just a minute, but it was close nonetheless. But again, no change in partisan control of those open seats or the closed seats, the incumbent seats. The 2 sort of closest battles were the freshman Democratic members who were just elected 2 years ago. Remember, while our U.S. senators get a 6-year stint, our congressional delegates each get just a 2-year stint, much like our state representatives here at the state level, just a 2-year stint. Part of that is the politics of that is making sure that people are much more responsive to their constituencies. It forces them to be back in their states much more than maybe a senator has to be, because they're up for election, quite honestly, so often that it suits them to just be back here in the state and visible. So Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens were Democratic members who won in that sort of big wave 2 years ago when Democrats took control of the U.S. House of Representatives. Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens were part of that wave. They both had relatively tough re-election bids this time around, but still came out of it relatively early in the evening compared to when some other results that have come in. Some results still haven't come in, if you know what I mean. But again, Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens survived their first challenge. It's often very difficult for a freshman congressional delegate to retain their seat. It's that first 2 years where a U.S. congressional member is often most vulnerable. Now, that doesn't always hold true. Sometimes someone has been there for decades and decades and in a surprise wave gets bumped off. Number of reasons for that, and we can talk about that over a beer someday when we can all hang out together again. But for now, suffice it to say that quite often freshmen members have that really uphill battle, not only on their first election to get in, but then that first election right after that to stay in. But Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens were able to retain their seats. Fred Upton was initially not going to run for re-election. He was going to retire. Fred Upton is a very popular Republican incumbent from the west side of the state, kind of Kalamazoo on down the coast. He was initially set to retire and not run again, but he ran. Decided to run again and handily defeated a term-limited state House Democratic member, John Hoadley. John Hoadley is the Democratic vice chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Michigan House of Representatives, fairly popular member from the Kalamazoo area. And he looked to try to unseat Fred Upton. At first, he looked to take a seat that was open and perhaps vulnerable and leaning just a little bit Democratic. And we can sort of say that because one of the seats that was picked up, and we'll get there on the when we get to the state house election, was a Kalamazoo Democratic seat. And so that sort of cued John Hoadley that maybe he had a chance this time to, the point that I made earlier, bump off someone who has been around for a long time. Even though initially it looked like he was going to be able to take that seat open until Fred Upton decided to run again. But Fred Upton is well liked by both sides of the aisle, fairly popular member, and pretty handily won his reelection. So the partisan split in Congress, again, like I mentioned a little bit ago, is 7-7. 14 members to the U.S. House of Representatives, 7 Republicans, same Democratic, same as the current makeup. Nothing changed in that election this time around. And there's a lot of conjecture about how, wow, Biden is going to be really popular and there's going to be a big wave of people and the Democrats are going to solidify their control and that, Republican members are vulnerable. And just like 2016, that didn't bear out. And that didn't bear out for a number of really interesting reasons, part of which we're still sort of crunching the numbers and trying to figure out, right? Like on a statewide election where you have, your U.S. senator is a statewide election. They don't run in a district. Their district is the entire state, just like when you're voting for president. So how is it, and what are those weird numbers that allows for someone like Joe Biden to win, but someone like John James to not win? So what does that look like? And how does that sort of bear out? And when you sort of trickle that then down to the congressional races and in the U.S. the state house races, how does that bear out where Republicans are able to maintain control, partisan control at the state level, whereas at the statewide level things took a very different turn? So really interesting election dynamics this time around. So I do want to talk about the state Senate for just a second, right? Because the state Senate was, like I mentioned at the outset, was not open for election this time around. A state senator at the state level here, and again, we have 38 of them, is a 4-year seat, not a 2-year seat. But, and there are 38 seats total right now, and the current partisan split is 22-16 Republicans over Democrats. It's a Republican chamber right now, a Republican-controlled chamber. So their next election is going to be 2022. And that's going to coincide with the governor, the secretary of state, the attorney general, some other statewide elections in 2022. So, but I do want to bring this up because we did have 2 Republican senators who are vacating their seats 2 years early, which is interesting. But that's because of, like I said at the outset, some local elections that popped up. You've got some folks, you have some openings and some interesting openings, especially for Macomb County prosecutor who was ousted for some relatively dangerous reasons. So that created some local openings. So State Senator Pete Lucido, who again was not going to be up for election for a state Senate seat until 2022, ran for Macomb County prosecutor and won. And then State Senator Pete McGregor, something about the name Pete, won his bid to become Kent County treasurer. So that's going to vacate those seats. They don't leave until January. So they're going to, the partisan split in the Michigan Senate is going to be 22-16 until the end of the year. Starting in January, it's going to be 20-16, but we expect the governor to hold a special election to fill those seats relatively early in 2021, maybe February, March, maybe March, April. Hard to tell right now, completely up to the governor when they want to do that. But most governors do that usually sooner than later. It helps to fill the seats, and people want their representation, and it's important. So those are 2 relatively safe Republican seats. It's where those aren't looking to change. So the partisan control of the state Senate will likely remain 22-16 even after a special election. Weirder things can happen. 2021 might be strange too. Hard to say, but for now, it looks like it's gonna maintain that partisan control. Oops. State House of Representatives. This was one of the big ones in the state. We had all 110 of our State House of Representatives up for election this time around. 110 seats, 58 Republican, technically 52 Democratic, but there is 1 vacancy on the Democratic side. State Representative Isaac Robinson passed from COVID back in March. They did not hold a special election to fill that seat, being an election year anyway. So that seat was open. So the partisan split, and we're going to get to that in a minute, is 58-52 really, even though there's that one vacancy. So that's a partisan split right now. 24 open seats in this election, and like I said, 1 due to the death of State Representative Isaac Robinson. Now, here's the interesting piece. 2 Democratic incumbents lost their reelection. Cheryl Kennedy lost to a David Martin. Cheryl Kennedy is sort of that out county Genesee area, sort of south towards Oakland County. It was her first term, like we talked about with Haley Stevens and Alyssa Slotkin. It was her first term, and she lost her bid to come back for a second term in that vaguely suburban, vaguely ex-urban area of Genesee County. And then Brian Elder, another Democratic state representative, lost his bid at a third term. And that's unusual. Normally, when you're running for your third term as a state rep, that's pretty safe. You've entrenched yourself in the community. They love to hate you. You're an SOB, but you're their SOB. So they tend to hang on to you when you're running for your third term. But these electoral politics this last time around, given some of the makeup, especially of Bay County, of Genesee County, of Macomb County, some of these suburban, exurban areas really trended hard for Trump. And it really changed the nature of some of those seats that had been Democratic seats in the past. Although for Cheryl Kennedy, it was a Republican seat. She won in that Democratic wave and then lost again when you look at the effect that sort of Trump had down ticket in the area that she lived in. The bigger surprise really was Brian Elder. So Democrats lost 2 seats, but then they gained 2 seats in the House of Representatives. An Oakland County seat, because Oakland County is trending more and more inexorably blue. That's the 38th district. And then the 61st district is just outside of Kalamazoo, the sort of Kalamazoo suburban seat. Was Republican for a while, but the last couple of elections, it has been trending increasingly Democratic. And Democrats picked up that seat. That is not the John Hoadley seat. That's actually a seat right next to his. But like I said, trending Democratic. So Dems lost 2, but then picked up 2. So that partisan split going into the 2021-22 session is again 58 to 52. So all of that talk about huge Democratic waves this time around and Democratic top of the ticket popularity didn't bear out down ticket, which is really super interesting in a state like Michigan. Should it have bared out, and what does that mean for Trump's effect at down ticket, Trump's effect in exurban and suburban communities and rural communities, and what really did that mean and how did that bear out? And people are going to be studying, just like the 2016 election, people are going to be studying the 2020 election for a long time. What does that mean? For pollsters, it probably means polls are dead until we try to figure out how to do polls again, because now for 2 presidential elections in a row, pollsters have been dead wrong. And does that mean, is that Trump, and is there something unique about Trump, or is it a problem, an inherent problem with how we think about voters and how we block voters? Remains to be seen. Fortunately, Ben and I aren't pollsters. We're just lobbyists, so we get to point and laugh at the pollsters. But 26 freshmen for the State House of Representatives. Yes, 24 open seats, but 26 freshmen, because remember, 2 incumbents lost, and that doesn't count as an open seat. So 26 freshman members for Ben and I to learn their names and not mistake for interns, and not mistake for other lobbyists, and hope that we remember that they're freshman representatives when they come in. We'll learn their names at some point. Hopefully they'll walk around for a while with name tags on. But 26 is so bad. Ben, what was the most that we've had? Was it 40 something? God, I want to say it was like 42 or 46 at a certain point. I think it was a huge number of them.
Yeah, I think it was 42 or 46 in the first and second or first and third elections after term limits took effect.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's been high before.
Yeah, it's been super high before. And that's, of course, a nightmare to try to learn some of those things. So, now things are sort of shaking out a little bit in an era of term limits where it's shrinking some of that horrible effect of, half the State House of Representatives as freshmen in turning over. But still, 26 is a relatively substantial number. State Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, especially at the state level, has way more of a bearing on your life than you ever would think it would, because any of those decisions, any decisions on things from health insurance at a state level to car insurance, most especially as we think about the recent, changes to car insurance and what that's going to look like, things that happen at property, things that, anything that happens at all these sort of statewide court cases, be they little local civil cases or be they, local criminal cases, is actually all solved not at the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately, but at the state Supreme Court. So the state Supreme Court has a gigantic amount of sway over the interpretation of state statute. It's nonpartisan, but nonpartisan. There are 7 members to the state Supreme Court. The current split right now is 4 Republican leaning, 3 Democratic leaning. Now I say quote nonpartisan in air quotes because the individuals who run for the state Supreme Court are chosen by their own state conventions. So the Democratic convention chooses candidates, the Republican convention chooses candidates. So though they run as nonpartisan judicial candidates, they are chosen by a partisan infrastructure, which is really terribly interesting, isn't it? So 2 seats were up for election this time. One was open, a judge was retiring, and that created an open seat. And then there's the incumbent, one incumbent, the Chief Justice Bridget Mary McCormick was running. Bridget Mary McCormick won re-election like super early in the evening. She's very, very popular. She's liked by both sides of the aisle. She is a Democratic leaning. In other words, she was appointed by a Democratic convention, but was elected to Chief Justice by a Republican leaning majority court, in part because of her judicious mind, in part because of how she interprets law and the approach that she takes and the ability to build bridges at the state Supreme Court level. Really cool and really interesting. So she won re-election relatively handily. And then the Democratic nominee this time around, Elizabeth Welch, won for that other seat. So that's going to shift that partisan, nonpartisan, partisan split at the state Supreme Court from 4 Republican, 3 Dem to 4 Dem, 3 Republican. So that's going to be a change in mindset at the Supreme Court. What it may mean are suits about state government at the executive level are going to change a little bit in nature as they float their way up to the state Supreme Court, in that Governor Whitmer might have a slightly friendlier court than she's perhaps had in the past. This past court, the 4-3 Republican split court, ultimately made the decision that the emergency manager law that the governor was using to continue to put out emergency orders was actually in and of itself an unconstitutional usurpation of legislative authority. In other words, the legislature should never have passed such a bill in 1945, and it was wrong of them to unconstitutionally take their own power away from themselves, was essentially the gist of that interesting decision. But it, of course, undid all of those executive orders and forced the legislature to come back and start passing bills. And this is not an editorial thing. This is just a statement of what happened. And it forced the legislature to come back and start passing bills to sort of codify some of those executive orders and put some of them back in place, especially those that the legislature thought were important. And in dealing with the governor and brought the governor and the legislature together, at least in part, to codify some of those executive orders. And now with the court changing going into next year, if there are other suits that float their way up, what might that mean for the future of lawsuits against the state of Michigan, against the executive, I guess I should say, with a friendlier court? Hard to say, especially with someone like Bridget Mary McCormick at the helm, and her sort of ability to bridge gaps and create consensus in a partisanly nonpartisan fashion. President, all jokes aside, I mean, the counts have been in for a while, and yes, there's a lot of the press doesn't get to be the ones who call an election. Well, no, they don't. But the Associated Press, the AP, has called presidential elections for decades, and part of that is their ability to look at and model numbers as they've come in, and create a system for essentially saying that one candidate or another does or does not continue to have a chance in a particular state. But as the counts are coming in and as the counts slowly start to get verified, it's looking more and more like the calls for President Biden, Vice President Biden, are to prop him up to president right now. Now, there are lots of lawsuits that have been filed. We can get into that a little bit, but that doesn't stop the ballot counting that's been happening. That doesn't stop the certification of those ballots, and Ben's going to get into that in just a second. And the sort of the electoral process in all 50 states is well underway, despite some of what we see in the news and on Twitter. So though it is a little bit of stay tuned, things are sort of tipping inexorably towards Vice President Biden indeed being President Biden. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ben. We're going to talk about election certification and the protection of elections and how election process works after we've cast our votes and what that process looks like.
Right. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Noah. Appreciate that. Yeah. So this should be the boring part of the presentation. However, it may be the exciting part this year. So how election certification goes. First of all, let's go back to Politics 101, Civics 101, and revisit the electoral process. The electoral process is the process by which we choose a president. It was created actually to lessen the ability of a populist candidate becoming president. The founders didn't want a person from a single region to be able to get enough votes, say the Northeast versus the Western part of the country at that point, which would have been, not quite us yet, would have been the Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, etc. Because the population wasn't in the West, but they still wanted the West to be important in the process. And so you see that today with, the quote unquote flyover states still being important because those electoral votes are important. So the way those are apportioned is that every state gets the same number of electoral votes as they have members of Congress and senators. So it's your 14, as Noah said, 14 congressmen in Michigan, plus the 2 senators is 16 electoral votes. And so in our state, how we have it is that if you win the popular vote in the state, you get all 16. So whether that is by 1 vote or by 9 million votes, you get 16 if you win. That's what kind of flattens the importance or the sway, maybe is a better way to say it, the sway of a New York or a Florida or a Texas or a California, because it's simply the majority. It's not, you only have to have a majority. So you can win California by, a bazillion votes and you get those electors, but, you can win, Michigan by a slim margin and you get all of those electors. So that's why occasionally, I think it's happened 4 times in our history, where a president has been elected without the popular vote, but with the electoral vote. And so that's why that is. For those who care, I think it's fascinating, but maybe not everybody here. And so that's sort of what we're after, is how do we get to that 270, right? And so the way that happens is everyone casts their vote. And then prior to the vote, both parties in each state have elected the number of electors that they would receive if they won the state. Okay, so in our case, there will be 16 Republican electors and 16 Democrat electors. And then whoever wins the popular vote, their party's electors would go and cast their ballot at the state capitol. And that's how that works. And then all 16 of those electors would have voted for whoever won. There is actually a golden ticket that they vote with, which I just found out, which is fascinating, and I can't wait to get a picture of it. There is that happens. And so they go and they vote at the Capitol, and that's how that goes. So, and that is, I think 40, no, it's 30, I think it's 35 days after the election, but I can't remember exactly. So that's how that works. Now let's talk about how to certify. So, oh, I should mention too, the faithless issue. Sorry, no, I'm flipping you around. The faithless issue. So a faithless elector is an elector that is elected by a party and then refuses to cast their vote for that party. That is super rare. It used to happen back in the early and mid 1800s, a little more than it does today. I'm not certain of the most recent election that occurred, but I don't think it's been in this century. Not that the century's terribly old at this point. I'm sure it happened once or twice in the 1900s, but in our state, it is illegal for an elector not to cast their ballot for the party that nominated them. So should an elector appear at the Capitol and refuse to cast their ballot, they would be immediately dismissed and replaced, and that ballot would be cast. So that's how that goes. And then before we get to the electors, I wanted to provide a little context to how the Electoral College actually works. But before the electors cast their ballots, the vote has to be certified. And so how does that work, right? So what happens is the day after the election, local clerks and county clerks will begin the certification process. And what that means is that the local township clerks or city clerks will take their poll book, which contains all the things. It's like the election day Bible, right? So it contains all the ballot numbers, it contains all the seals, it contains all the things, the counts, how many people voted, all that stuff. So that will go to the county board of canvassers, the county clerk, and then the county board of canvassers will look at that. The county board of canvassers is made up of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats that are appointed by the county board. They are appointed from a list of people nominated by each party. So we know that they're Republicans, we know that they're Democrats, there's no wonky stuff going on there. Each party nominates people, and then those folks will be chosen from a list. Those 4 people will then take those poll books and they'll start going through by precinct, and they'll do every precinct in the county, and they're looking for anomalies. They're looking for comments in the phone book, in the poll book. How old am I? In the poll book that say, this weird thing happened, or this was a problem, or this went great. Whatever those comments are in there throughout the day from those working the poll. So they're looking for any kind of anomaly, any strange thing that happened, any votes that don't match. If the votes cast don't match the votes counted, that's a problem. That they'll check out. That they have the ability to order a recount in a precinct. They have the ability to bring in the clerk from that precinct or the poll workers from that precinct and ask questions, sort things out. If there is an anomaly, they have ways to rectify that. And ultimately what happens is in each precinct, those 4 people need to have a majority agree to what occurred, okay, or what the solution is. So they'll figure it out and go, this is this way because we still had some provisional ballots out or whatever. Provisional ballots are, mostly from civilians overseas or civilians working inside the military overseas, etc. And sometimes they come back late. If the clerk gets them out, just to get in the weeds a little bit, Noah knows I'm good at this. If the clerk sends the ballot late, then it has that many days to come back after the election late. So everyone has the same amount of time to fill it out. Even if the clerk sends it a couple days late, then I'll have a couple days to get it. So it takes a few days to get all the votes back, but those provisionals are usually very small. But those have to be added in because every vote gets counted, right? So that takes a couple days, and they figure it out locally. Then they take those certified poll books and send those results to the State Board of Canvassers. State Board of Canvassers is appointed by the governor, same process, from nominees from both parties. So we know that those folks are what they say they are. They're Republicans and they're Democrats. They're not pulling wool over anybody's eyes and that kind of thing. They're pretty well known. So that's how that goes. They basically do the same thing. So if they don't like a county's results in some precinct, they can order a recount. They can haul those folks in. They can, all that kind of stuff. They have to also agree by a majority, so 3-1. So it takes both parties to certify the election results. And they have technically 40 days to do that. They are meeting on the 23rd of this month to discuss that. That's 20 days. That's election day plus 20. So they've got a little more time. The Electoral College, however, does meet on day 35. So they're going to lose 5 days in the ability. So they've got basically till that, I don't know, probably 34th day at midnight to figure out whether it's certified or not. That said, this year there may not get certified on the 23rd. No one really knows what's going to happen there. There have been challenges presented. One of the board of canvassers at the state level has a spouse that's named in one of the challenges in Detroit as a poll watcher, and so there's a little bit of consternation by some folks whether that board of canvasser member should recuse themselves or not. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think that's going to happen, and I'm not sure it should. It's not my call. But just to give you some of the drama that's going on with the state board of canvassers right now. Normally, the presidential certification is a no-brainer, and it's no big deal. This year, clearly, there are some questions, and although there is a fairly wide margin as far as recent elections go in Michigan, there are still questions, and so those will be worked out. Those will be solved. If the board of canvassers does not approve, fails to approve, votes 2-2 or what have you, then it would go to the courts, and the courts would figure it out. So that's how that goes. Don't ask me how long the courts have to figure that out, because I don't know. It has literally never been an issue before. So that's where we're at there. And I think, Noah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks. My tech wasn't working there for a second. All right. And Ben, you and I can kind of go back and forth on this one, but we want to talk a little bit about lame duck. And again, shrugging Han Solo, who knows what's going to happen? So lame duck is that point of time. So now it's post-election, and bills that don't pass by December 31st of an even year, so an election year, are considered dead, because a legislative session lasts 2 years, or the same amount of time as a state rep. So even though the Senate is 4 years, they meet in legislative sessions just like the state reps do. They just do 2 of them for every state rep's 1 of them. So again, bills that don't pass by this December are considered dead. And it's also the amount of time where your outgoing members leave at the end of December in preparation for the incoming members in January and the beginning of a new session. You've got the wins and losses and so on and so forth. And so after the election, until the legislature adjourns what they call sine die, sine die, without a day, that means that they're adjourning to end a particular session. And so that's that lame duck session. It's after the election and right before they adjourn for the year. And it's called lame duck because you have, quote, lame duck members, an old term from, I don't know, 18 blah, blah, blah. I don't remember. Ben probably knows because he's the history guy, but I won't pin him to that yet. Quick, Google it. But it was a term that essentially means someone who is leaving the legislature and isn't quite accountable because they don't have anyone to be accountable to anymore. And so it creates that sort of interesting legislative environment. And we've talked about this a lot at MAPERS conferences and what does lame duck mean and all the things that have happened. One of the most, Ben and I have both been involved at the Michigan legislature, both on staff and as lobbyists for more than 20 years. I don't want to, not to forego our age, but for a long time.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah. And I want to say that one of the most active, and not active in a good way, lame duck sessions was just a handful of years ago. I think it was Snyder's outgoing with 600 pieces of legislation passing in about a 2.5 to 3 week period. It was insane. And there's a point at which you just aren't keeping track of what's going on with what's moving through the legislature anymore. And why is that? Actually, as Ben and I were talking the other day, Ben, you sort of put lame duck really interestingly into 4 silos, 4 ways to think about how and why lame duck looks that way. If you'd remind us all.
Yeah, sure. So it kind of goes into a few buckets on whether you're going to have a really busy or a less busy lame duck. As Noah said, this is the last chance for a lot of people to get anything done. It's also a chance for people to get things done without a lot of responsibility for it, because they don't really answer to anyone anymore. And that has, I think sometimes detrimental effects. It's also an opportunity to get things done that are hard, because you don't have, tax increases and that kind of stuff, because you don't have anyone, you have a lot of people not responsible to folks anymore. So the first bucket is whether the chamber changes or not, or the governor changes or not. In this case, we have the House that was essentially the House that was up, and the House did not change at all. 0 numbers either way. So that we take that one off the table, and that's a big one, because a lot of times when a House changes, they want to get everything done before the other party comes in and tries to undo a bunch of stuff, right? So that's the big one. Second one is are there leadership things that need to happen? Are the speaker and the majority leader or the governor, do they have things they want to get done? Like, I don't know, backfilling the executive orders that don't exist anymore, right? With legislative changes that would be lawful. And that's not an editorial comment. That's just what happened. It was determined not to be lawful. So is that an issue? And in this case, we may have some of that specifically. My guess is there will also be some budget things that need to be adjusted because of the how quickly it went through. The other thing that may determine it is folks who are leaving, who feel like they haven't gotten that one issue done that they've been trying to get done for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years or however long they've been there, and or they feel like they have a legacy to complete before they get out, right? They have this passionate thing that they want to get done to be known as the person who got that thing done. And so you have, that gets into some deal-making territory. And that is a case where you can have things start to get connected that have nothing to do with each other. I mean, you could have a person who wants to, quote unquote, fix the drain code because they're passionate about that, which is the least passionate thing I can think of. But that might be the thing they want. I wanted to change this thing in the drain code. And so they'll go to their buddy who, needs this other thing to be done that has to do with health policy and say, hey, if I could get you to support me on this drain code thing, I would really love to help you with your healthcare issue. And that kind of stuff just starts snowballing and going. And pretty soon you got these weird pyramidal kind of triangular deals happening amongst folks. And that can start to make people really busy. The other thing that can happen is you would have an interest group like a MAPERS say, I wonder if I could get this through in 10 days, before anybody notices. Not that MAPERS would ever do that. But unless it was, it's good stuff. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Trust me. It's good. But you might have an interest group that sees a vehicle that they can put their issue into and sub that in there and then jam that through in 10 or 12 session days, which is all that really exists in a lame duck session. And so those are really the 4 categories, kind of as I see them anyway, of how things kind of work in lame duck. The first one we don't really have to worry about. The rest of them we kind of have to do. So at this point, it is so difficult to determine what will and won't happen because of some of those side deals that get tagged onto things going forward. So Noah, back to you.
Sure, and I think that, there's sort of a fourth and a half bucket that's sort of a combination of things for this year especially that's unusual for any other year because of the weird times that we're in right now. But it's sort of a COVID bucket, and it's a question.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of leadership priority, but it's also looking at like, are there some things that we need to do towards the end of the year as the legislature to either react to the trajectory of the disease, or are there things that the legislature wants to do to check future governor power, or to check or to increase their own power to participate in what types of decisions they have to make, and what their role is in a pandemic. So given that we have, given that we're in a pandemic, that kind of creates this weird, maybe one shot, once in a century fifth bucket of what do we do, and are there things that we want to do that fall into that bucket? And what is the executive going to do about that? Does the executive exercise a veto pen? Are there deals to be cut on what executive power versus legislative power in a pandemic looks like? It's kind of a weird and new mindset, and there should be a little bit of that that's happening now. The dangerous part is that the legislature was set to meet largely this week, but the House canceled session yesterday, and not because they're callous. Now, a side note, let's take a tangent. Just because the legislature isn't meeting in Lansing doesn't mean they're sitting at home playing video games. Legislators have very, very, very busy schedules. They work 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks because every Boy Scout graduation, every parade, every senior home ice cream social, they're attending it. They're getting out there. They're seeing things. They're holding their own coffee hours. They're holding community forums, although now it's all on Zoom. But they're engaging in a lot of local stuff. So just because they're not in Lansing doing things doesn't mean that a lawmaker isn't working for their constituency. And it doesn't mean that they're not necessarily corresponding with the governor and the executive. Incoming Majority Leader Ben Frederick doesn't need to be in Lansing to call the governor's team at the Department of Health and Human Services and wonder what's going on with executive orders and local health departments. Ben Frederick can just do that because he has the ability and power to do so, and in fact does. For any of you who live in Owasso and follow Ben, I would recommend it. He's a thoughtful statesman. But at any rate, so they canceled session on Wednesday, in part because several House members either have tested positive for COVID themselves, or their family members have tested positive or have been exposed to someone who's positive, and so they have to begin that 5 to 14 day quarantine period. And so the House said, we just can't be here. We can't gather in one room, 110 people in one room, breathing on each other, even with masks on. It's just not, it's not a safe environment. The Senate met, but the Senate met as briefly as they possibly could. They came in, they had 4 pieces of business and 1 vote, and they got the heck out of Lansing. They've scheduled a session day for next week, but it's not probably going to be a real session day. They're going to have trouble putting together a quorum of people who can actually make it to Lansing. And so really the legislature is going to do a lot that they can in their districts, dealing with the executive and dealing with the executive branch and dealing with the pandemic and thinking about and preparing for what they want to do in the lame duck session that is set to start on Tuesday, December 3rd and run for 3 weeks. And it will be, that week right before Christmas that the legislature will adjourn for the year. But if the disease continues on its current trajectory and more members, I just saw a text message flash on my phone about yet another senator who just tested positive a moment ago. If that keeps up, are we even going to have this thing in December? Or because nothing changed in the Senate and nothing changed in the House and nothing changed with the governor, and nothing has really changed that much, can they just say, if it's a good idea on December 2nd, it'll still be a good idea in January, and let's just do it in January? I don't know yet. That depends on a lot of things. In 3 weeks, as long as we all behave ourselves, is a long enough time that perhaps we can get a grip on things. But if not, even that's in some doubt, or maybe an abbreviated one. Maybe they meet deeper into January. It is not unheard of for the legislature to meet over Christmas and New Year. Prop A, for those of you who remember Proposal A and how we think about property taxes, that was a New Year's Eve vote, was it? Or was it a Christmas Eve vote? Ben, do you remember?
I think
One
it
of
was
the two.
Christmas Eve.
I think it was a Christmas Eve vote. So they've done it before, and it's not to say they wouldn't do it again if there's something pressing enough for them to do, which there could very well be. So all of that to say, the Han Solo shrug, I guess we'll see. Chaos ensues. A brief note on the 101st legislature. So we're in the historic 100th legislature in Michigan right now. They didn't really do much ceremonially. They had some neat stuff, and they did a few little things to commemorate that this is the 100th legislature. So we start the 101st in January. The legislature technically begins the second Wednesday of January, and quite often they do. They'll have a day, and a lot of members will come to Lansing and get sworn in, even though they've been sworn in locally, which is what really actually counts. Remember what Ben was talking about electoral politics and going over the voting rolls and what that looks like locally. A lot of guys get sworn in locally, and that's official enough. But they'll come to the Capitol. They'll do a nice little ceremonial swearing in. And that will be this year, well, next year, January 2021, on January 13th. Leadership has already been chosen. We already know who the leaders are going to be going into next session. Sometimes it wasn't always that way. Sometimes it was really contentious, and it pushed things into January and sort of delayed when a legislature can get its wheels moving again. But recently, the legislature has been way in front of themselves about thinking what their lines of ascension look like, their ascension, their accession plans look like, succession plans, I'm sorry, look like into the future. And it's good. It's a good exercise for them to think about who they want to be their leaders. Now, this could have, if the prognosticators were right, this could have been flipped. But like we said, nothing changed. Speaker of the House is our current Speaker Pro Tem, Jason Wentworth. From Clare. So if any of you on this webinar are from Clare or Gladwin or Osceola or any of that, you are actually represented by the Speaker of the House. And that's advantageous, so that as you call the legislature, as you make phone calls to your state rep to try to get stuff done around the Capitol, yours is the Speaker. Not bad. So that's Jason Wentworth. He's going to be the Speaker. Now, he's already put a leadership team around him. I mentioned him a minute ago. Ben Frederick from Owasso is going to be the floor leader. The floor leader's job in the majority is to determine what bills do and do not get taken up on the House floor on any given day. So as bills are introduced and referred to committee, and committees kick those bills out and send them to the floor, somebody's got to be in charge of what the legislature is going to vote on that day. That's Ben Frederick. So if anybody's from Owasso, hey, there you go. He's in charge of what gets voted on. And then Pam Hornberger is the Speaker Pro Tem. Why do they have a Speaker Pro Tem? Because the Speaker of the House is typically busy doing Speaker things, being a leader, and marshaling votes, and figuring out maneuvering and posturing on the floor for how controversial or non-controversial pieces of legislation move, and what he wants his caucus to do and what he's hoping the Democrats do. So then somebody needs to sit up in the chair and make session happen. And that is your Speaker Pro Tem. And this time around, that is Pam Hornberger from Chesterfield Township. So anybody on this webinar from Macomb County around Chesterfield Township, Pam Hornberger is the Speaker Pro Tem, well positioned in Republican leadership to help get stuff done. The Democrats have also chosen their leadership. And that is Donna Lazinski. Donna Lazinski is going to be the minority leader, or the Democratic leader, from that sort of out-county area of Washtenaw. Scioto Township is where she's from, got kind of a district that skirts around Ann Arbor. So anybody from that particular area, Donna Lazinski is well positioned to also help get things done, because the minority leader's job is to try to figure out how the minority can be effective when they're not the majority. And that's Donna's job. And Donna is actually well respected on both sides of the aisle by her colleagues, especially by the Republicans, because much like Bridget Mary McCormick, she understands, she's actually a business owner, a small business owner, and understands that sort of mindset and understands how to sort of bring people together, and is not necessarily a divisive character. The floor leader-elect so leader-elect Lazinski. The minority gets a floor leader too, but the minority floor leader is a different role, where the majority floor leader's job is, what are we voting on today? The minority floor leader's job is, how does the minority get a voice in what happens with those particular votes so that tyranny of the majority doesn't reign. And it's a relatively interesting and important job. And she has brought on for the second time now, Yusuf Rabi is the current minority floor leader from Ann Arbor. Yusuf is going to be the minority floor leader again. So that's what leadership is going to look like. What we do not have yet are committees. So on the Senate side, like we said, nothing has really changed. Pete Lucido is gone and Pete McGregor is gone. They chaired some very important committees on the Senate side. So there will be some shuffling of committees on the Senate side, but that's not going to happen until January. Now, just because somebody chaired something this time around on the House side doesn't mean they're going to chair it again, in some cases because they're no longer here, and in some cases because now there's a new leadership team and maybe they've made promises to put themselves in leadership to people, to put them in charge of some of the plum committees, or perhaps it's just time to shuffle the deck and put some new people in charge of things, fresh blood, fresh mindset, fresh ideas. So there is something called the Committee on Committees, which is about the most bureaucratic name I can ever think of in my entire life, and it's hilarious and I love it. But the Committee on Committees is going to set to meet, and their job is to try to determine who sits on what committee. So that's going to happen in January. So we're not going to know, like for MAPERS, you know, when we focus on the local government committee, we focus on the reg reform committee, sometimes we focus on the appropriations committee. We're not going to know who sits in those seats, and so who's effective for us to start getting in front of and putting MAPERS in front of, and which communities those are represented by, so we can flex some of that local community muscle until January. And then the normal process takes over. The governor will unveil her executive budget in mid to late January. The legislature will do the same thing in February, and it's off to the budget races, and it's off to legislating from there. Ben and I bored you to death and bored you to tears and guaranteed that we can only give you 5 minutes to ask us stuff. So if there's any questions from the field, if we can answer it, we are thrilled to.
So, I just have one question, Noah or Ben, about the remote meetings for public boards. Can you just one more time clarify where we are with that?
Yes, so very quickly, the executive orders that were issued for, you know, when we had all those executive orders and we were under sort of the state of emergency, one of them was to allow for any reason for a public body to hold an online meeting, and as long as you published when your meeting was going to be to the public and allowed for a method by which the public could participate. But we talked about that court case. We talked about the court case that chucked all that stuff out, that essentially said those emergency powers are unconstitutional. It undid all of those executive orders. One of the executive orders it undid was the executive order saying you could have online meetings. What that did legally is that it said any public body that had a meeting starting at about July until like September, October, when that decision happened, was actually not a legal meeting, and thus any decision that was made at that meeting was not a legal decision. So the legislature had to very quickly pass a bill that said, no, those meetings were fine and those decisions were fine. And so they did that. But in the sausage making process that is legislating, the pound of fat that unfortunately the legislature wanted for that was, we're very nervous about online meetings going forward, and we're not sure that public bodies are being entirely honest, says the legislature, about what those votes are. So the only reasons that you can have after this December 31st, so you can still have online meetings till December 31st. After December 31st, the only reason you can have an online meeting is if you are in the military or have a medical condition. And then that only applies to individual participants. You still have to have an active public quorum present and offer the ability to have online meetings or for the citizens to participate online. There is a gigantic coalition of MAPERS, counties, townships, the municipal league, school boards, any organization that you can think of that has a presence in Lansing, that is a public body, be it an appointed public body or an elected public body, still wants the ability to have these online meetings. So we are engaging in a lame duck effort to extend that sunset through next year to give us time to work on a more robust, what can online meetings sort of look like, and what is our prior legal understanding of how public bodies could engage in online public meetings. So we're working on it. Stay tuned.
Okay, awesome. All right, so thank you all for joining us today. We at MAPERS regret that we had to cancel the spring and fall conferences this year, but we remain optimistic for 2021. We'll continue to monitor the COVID-19 virus situation, and we will move forward with in-person events once it's safe to do so. In the meantime, we will continue to offer thoughtful and relevant programming like we had today. And we really appreciate Ben and Noah going through all of this for us. Our next webinar is going to be a new trustee workshop, and we're going to plan that for January. That session is specifically designed for new trustees serving their first term in office. And we'll be sending out emails and putting it on the website. Anybody who's still on this call, if you please kind of mention it at your board meetings to some of the new trustees. And I know in years past at the MAPERS conferences, they've appreciated having those sessions for them. So, and if you are interested in sponsoring a webinar, or if you have a speaker or a topic you'd like to mention to us, please reach out and let us know. So on behalf of the MAPERS board and myself, we wish you, your family, your colleagues, good health and safety. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.